Hey, it's Dave again. I wanted to go over today about some of the right hand techniques that we would use on the bass. And for me, I've always found that the right hand is the hand that I've struggled with more as a bass player rather than the left hand. And if you think about most of the different styles of bass you would play, the left hand or the fretting hand is always doing kind of the same thing. But the right hand is doing lots of different things. There's lots of different techniques to learn. So I don't know every technique, but I'm going to go over the ones that I do know. Some of them I'm good at, I use all the time, and other ones I rarely use. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to start with the thumb. So the first technique we could use is we could just pluck the bass with the thumb. I think that's originally the way that Leo Fender intended the precision bass to be played, because they used to have this bar down here called the tug bar, and that's kind of the idea behind it. He would just play it with his thumb, and a lot of early bass players did that. And there are other, I don't know of any offhand guys that are well known that just play with their thumb, but I've definitely seen a lot of guys do it. And it has a certain round tone to it. It really work good in country or on a ballad. Might work good on a bluegrass song, So that's the thumb technique. Another thing you can do with your thumb is you can slap with it. And there's two different ways to slap. The way I slap is, I guess, what you call the traditional way, and I learned it from basically watching Flea when I was just starting out. And the idea is you take your thumb and you put your thumb parallel to the fretboard, and you just drive the string into the frets. The other technique is called double thumbing, and Victor Wooten's the guy that popularized that. And I don't use that technique, but I do know how to do it. I'm not really great at it, but the idea is you take your thumb, and now we're going to lay our thumb more parallel to the strings. And the idea is as we drive through the string, and we come back up and catch the string. It's almost like we're using our thumb as a pick. And, So I'm not an expert at that technique. There's a lot of, like, Victor Wooten is just amazing with the things he does with that. There's a lot of guys on YouTube that are just awesome at it. I haven't really ever had a call to do any of those sorts of songs when I was playing. But that's another technique. So you got the traditional slap and double thumbing. So that's pretty much all the things I know you can do with your thumb. We go to the index finger. So another way to play, instead of playing with your thumb like that, you can play with just your index finger. In fact, James Jamerson, that's how he played. He just played with one finger. A lot of upright players do that, and what they'll do is they'll take their other fingers and put them beside their index finger in order to stiffen it up, so they can pluck that big upright bass. James Jamerson, he was an upright player. He switched to the electric bass, and he kept that same technique. So he played with the long part of his finger. You can get a nice, smooth, round bass tone with that. You can also, I don't want to forget that, your tone of how you're playing has a lot to do with where you play on the bass. Of course, if you play down here, you get more treble, and down here you get more bass. And there's different tones throughout, everywhere you play on the string. So experiment with your bass and figure out where you like the sound best. I typically play with, the way I play is I play with my thumb right here against this pickup, or somewhere in that region. When I played a Stingray bass, I still played on the pickup. usually when I play whatever bass it is, I'm going to find one of the pickups or somewhere in the middle of the bass, and that's where my home's going to be. I'm going to stick my thumb against that. That way, while I'm not looking, I can always find out where home is. Another index finger technique. So we've got like Jamerson, which I believe they called him the hook because of that. Another technique Chuck Rainey had is called the in and out technique. And what you do is you use your index finger like a pick. And I guess Chuck came up with that technique because he was asked to play staccato lines like that would traditionally be played with a pick. And playing them with 2 fingers, he would just get worn out, doing multiple takes of a song. So he came up with that technique to help him out. Another thing we can do with our index finger is we can tap with it. So we could take and we can actually fret notes on the fretboard. So we can do those sorts of things. Or like Billy Sheehan does, we can hold a chord. Like I'll hold a D power chord, and I can... I can pluck different notes there. So those are things I can do with my index finger. You take my middle finger and I can combine it with my index finger, and I can play the traditional style with 2 fingers. I would suggest every bass player ought to be really well acquainted with this technique. I think it's the most versatile way to play the bass. And that's why so many guys use it. It's a very a good way to attack the instrument. You can also use your middle finger instead of your ring finger instead of your middle finger, and that's how I typically play. I don't play with these 2 fingers. I play with these 2 fingers. And the way that came about was when I would play, if you're playing every week, you're playing a lot of shows, a lot of times I would get sores on my middle finger. And then, I would start playing with my ring finger because that finger hurt. And that's basically how, and then I think I just got lazy and I just forgot to go back to my middle finger. And since then, for probably 15 years, I've played that way. But either way, it works just fine. You can play with 3 fingers too, instead of just playing, or you can play. Now Billy Sheehan plays that way, and he plays quarter notes, which is a really cool technique. The hard part about that is when you play with 3 fingers, you automatically want to play triplets. It's a group of 3, and it's just so easy to put groups of 3 together. Playing groups of 4 with 3 fingers is hard because which finger you're playing one with changes every time, and that can be tough to get through. Another thing we can do with our middle and our ring fingers is to pop. We can pull up on the string and let go, and it makes this popping noise. And usually it's combined with slapping. And it doesn't matter which finger you pop with, whatever's comfortable to you. That's the traditional method, or you can combine it with the double thumbing. So I'll see if I can do it. I'm no good at it. There it goes. I never use that technique. Most of the situations I find myself playing in, they don't call for that sort of bass playing, but that's the basic idea of what you can do with it. You can use your whole hand a couple of different ways. One, you can strum with it, or you can flick the strings, like I think they call it the flamenco technique, which is another thing I don't use. If you want to see a guy that's awesome at it, look up Abraham Laboriel. He's incredible with it. He does just the most amazing things with that technique, flicking the strings. Again, it's not something I've ever been called on to do, so it's not something I've ever worked on doing, other than to just say, oh, well, that's what that is. But, you never know. You may be called in a situation where somebody wants you to do that. Another thing, the black sheep method is to use a pick. And I actually, this is a technique I have used quite a bit. Some songs just demand a pick. I think of one of my favorite pick players is Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses. And he has, so you use a pick. And the pick, you can change your tone, obviously, the same way with all the other techniques. Where you play at makes a big difference. But it's definitely, I think playing with a pick is a skill that every bass player should have. It's just the most appropriate thing for certain types of songs. So that's all of the bass playing right-hand techniques that I know about. And I would imagine most of these, a well-rounded bass player would have at least know how to play with two fingers, know how to play with a pick, and know how to do one of those methods of slapping and popping. Those are techniques that are going to come up all the time. The slapping and popping maybe not so much anymore, but it's still something you need to have in your repertoire. Thank you very much.